She awoke to a cold glow, her eyes heavy and her mind foggy, as if she had just swum up from a deep trench. Then pain shot through her arms. She realized she'd lay on a hard floor, her wrists wrapped in glowing cuffs of alien design, cables, and crystalline bars binding her to the wall. Her heart pounded, each beat echoing in her ears, and she fought to draw in a steady breath, her lungs protesting. The cell was silent, except for the low hum of energy flowing through the bars. The air tasted faintly of ozone and fear. In the dim light, she saw her own reflection flicker on the wall, pale skin streaked with sweat, eyes wide and darting butt. Her thoughts tumbled back to him, the human who had saved her life on that dying world. She remembered his face, so gentle as he lifted her from the wreckage, his hand warm against her cheek, his voice soft when he told her she would live. Now she was the one held captive, and he lay beyond these walls, unconscious and helpless, his fate tied to her escape. She strained against the cuffs, flexing each finger, feeling her muscles burn as the cables tightened. Her mind raced, searching for any sign of weakness in the alien tech. The glow in the room shifted colors from blue to green, and she sensed a pattern, a rhythm, in the pulse of the light. If she could time her effort with the moment the energy dipped, perhaps the bonds would loosen. She tested one cuff, then the other, and felt a faint give of promise that she might break free. Beyond the crystal bars, she heard voices 2 or 3 guards, speaking in harsh clicks and guttural tones she barely understood. Their forms were tall and thin, with skin like polished metal, and they carried long staffs that crackled with power. They whispered about Subject K, about genetic markers and containment protocols, and her pulse quickened at the mention of genes. Had they locked her here because of what she was? Because of the strange ability she had discovered? The spark of power that lay dormant within her cells. She forced herself to calm her breath, drawing deep gulps of air, willing her heart to slow. Memories swirled, flashes of him dodging gunfire to pull her from the flames, of his fingers brushing her cheek as he whispered that she was safe. She closed her eyes, letting those memories anchor her courage. If he could risk everything for her, she could risk everything to return the favor. But first she had to escape. Using every ounce of strength, she shifted her weight, rolling her shoulders in a slow, deliberate motion, testing the cable's tolerance. She felt the energy pulse, then flicker, as if responding to her resolve. She pressed harder, muscles straining, and for a heartbeat the bonds loosened. She smiled inwardly, tasting victory, before the energy flared green and the cables snapped. Taut again, jolting her shoulder. Pain lanced through her arm. But the spark remained, warning that her power was near the surface. She rested for a moment, head bowed, listening. The guards moved down the corridor, their footsteps distant but steady. One chuckled, a sound like metal scraping on metal, and she wondered what they thought of her. Did they see a wild animal, a specimen to study, or simply another prisoner to contain? And they seemed curious, their whispers full of scientific fascination, not cruelty. That gave her hope perhaps she could trick them, coax one guard to slip her a tool or distract them long enough to break free. She stood slowly, cables dragging her upright, and approached the bars. She pressed her hand to the crystal, watching the glow tick down from green to blue, then back. She placed her other hand beside it, feeling the hum vibrate through her palm. If she could time her move with the low point, she might shatter that bar, if not with brute force. Then, with a focused pulse of her own energy, her power huddled inside her like a sleeping beast, waiting for the right moment to awaken. Memories came again as laughter as they raced through ruined streets. His gentle encouragement when she faltered, the way his eyes glowed with hope. She breathed in those memories, letting them fill her veins with determination. The cables loosened a fraction more, and she leaned in, gathering her strength. Her eyes burned with intent as she willed the spark to grow, to flare, to break these bonds. Outside, the guards drew closer, their voices rising in a sudden argument. She recognized the word for breach. They feared an intruder or a malfunction. This was her chance. She focused, felt the energy swell behind her eyes and in her blood. With a guttural shout, she unleashed a tan-invisible wave that rattled the crystal, sending cracks spidering across its surface. The guards froze, their mouths agape in alarm. Light exploded in her vision as the cell door burst inward, shards of crystal scattering like stars. She stumbled forward, arms free at last, her chest heaving. The corridor lay before her, bathed in sickly green light. And at the end she saw him slumped against the bulkhead, breathing shallow but alive. Relief flooded her, drowning out pain and fear, and she sprang toward him, every step a promise. She had broken free, she would save him back. The first part of their rescue had begun, and her heart soared with hope and defiance. Asterisk, she moved like a shadow along the corridor. Every step measured and silent as the glow from overhead panels flickered. Her heart thumped in her chest, matching the cadence of her footfalls, and she forced herself to breathe slow, to think clear. The prison pipes hissed in the walls, carrying a faint scent of acid and metal, and somewhere ahead she heard the dull clank of armored boots. She pressed herself against the cold bulkhead, chest rising and falling, and let the guards pass, their tall frames blocking the light as they loomed by. Their language rolled like thunder-sharp clicks, and low hums, and she listened, piecing together each word until she knew their patrol patterns as well as they did. She had seen 3 shift changes since her escape, each one bringing slightly different routines, small mistakes. One guard paused too long at a junction, another dropped his ration beside a waste chute. She memorized every pause, every slip, and waited for the moment when the corridor would be empty enough, yet still, close enough to the lab where her key lay hidden. Ahead lay the central hub rows of cells, mirrored on either side, its guards stationed at each end, their visors glowing red like watchful eyes. She tucked herself into an alcove, her fingers brushing against the healing slash across her arm. One she'd earned, prying open the crystal cell proof that pain would not stop her. A soft click echoed nearby, and she froze, narrowing her eyes. A single guard stepped into view, taller than the rest, with a faint sputter in his stride that suggested old injuries. His staff was lowered, not pointed, and his head tilted as if listening for something beyond the hum of the station's life. Support. She watched him study the floor, then reach down and pick up a small Defies alien datapad, its edges glowing faintly. Rather than pocket it, he glanced around, then slipped it into his belt pouch with a careful touch. He paused under a light panel, his face half hidden in shadow. She saw it then, the glimmer of kindness in his eyes. The hesitation before he moved on. She exhaled softly, letting relief wash through her. This guard might be her chance. She stepped out, stooping low, and fell into step behind him, matching his pace, matching his breathing quiet as a breeze. He stopped at a junction, tapped his wrist console, and the doors slid open with a hiss. She followed, the corridors shifting from stark steel to softer lights, walls lined with data terminals and locked cabinets. The guard paused before one. With rounded corners, typed a code, and it swung open, revealing rows of small, clear boxes, each holding tools, medical supplies, occasionally a key or two. She gripped her chest as her eyes flicked to the lower shelf where a single key floated, in a magnetic cradle, its shape odd and curved, humming with power. The guard reached in, pulling out a syringe first, then paused, his hand hovering over the key, his breath caught. She swallowed hard, heart pounding against her ribs, and readied herself for rejection. But he closed his eyes for a moment, then swiped the key into his own pouch, closing the cabinet with a quiet click. She let herself smile inside. They were both risking too much, but maybe they shared a cause deeper than orders. He turned to leave. She fell back again, letting him walk ahead by a few paces before following once more. Her mind raced. What if he betrayed her? What if this was a test? She would trust only when the key was in her hand, only when the lock clicked open. They reached a junction near the medical bay, and he glanced over his shoulder, meeting her gaze in the dim light. His eyes were wide, an unspoken question. She nodded once, firm, silent, and he exhaled sharply, relief or fear she could not tell. He stepped to a side door, tapped a code, and it parted, revealing a small room lit by green panels, filled with benches and lockers. Inside, he moved to a locker and slid in the key, watching anxiously. The lock clicked, and the door swung open. Inside was a thin uniform, dark and soft, with no insignia. He handed it to her, voice low as a whisper. "Dress," he said in broken accents. "Blend escape." She slid into the uniform, the fabric cool against her bruised skin, and felt something heavy in her pocket. Her fingers closed around the key he had taken warm, real, her ticket to him. She bowed her head, gratitude flooding her, and he stood awkwardly, boots shifting on the floor. Sirens wailed suddenly in the station red, lights flooding the hallway outside. And her pulse leaped. He cursed under his breath, grabbing her arm. "Go now," he urged, eyes darting to the door. Asterisk. She nodded, pressed a hand to his shoulder, and then slipped out into the corridor before the guards could swarm. Behind her, she heard shouts and boots stamping, the traitor discovered. She let the noise fade behind her, focusing on the path. To the lab, the one cell where he lay, frail but alive. Waiting for her, she moved fast now. Her body fueled by adrenaline and determination, every instinct honed by fear of failure. The corridors twisted, panels flickered, and she used every shortcut she had learned from watching the guards. At one turn, she paused under a broken light fixture, her hand trembling as she retrieved the key. It glowed softly in her palm, calling to her, and she tucked it beneath her sleeve. Secret, hers alone. She took a deep breath, eyes hardening. With resolve, nothing would stop her no patrol, no lockdown, no cosmic law. She would reach him and break every chain that bound them, defy every limit the galaxy had set upon them both. And with that thought, she sprinted toward the heart of the station. Her fate his-twined by a single stolen key. Asterisk, she slipped through the shadowed passage. Her uniform soft against her skin, the stolen key safe in her pocket every breath. She tasted of freedom and fear, because she knew the worst was yet to come. The station's corridors felt alive, metal ribs humming with power, lights flickering like warning signs. She pressed herself flat against the cool wall, listening for the echo of guards' boots, and when she heard nothing but distant alarms, she moved on, silent and swift. Ahead lay the genetic lab where he waited, the same room where she had unleashed her hidden power and shattered her crystal prison. The memory drove her steps, the weight of his body in the stasis pod, the soft whir as the seal opened, his hand reaching for hers. She would not let that memory fade into regret. She would save him now, whatever it cost. But the lab doors were sealed. She reached the control panel, her fingers brushing the smooth surface, and drew out the key. It glowed faintly under her touch, an alien design that pulsed with energy. She pressed it to the reader, and the panel's light sputtered. Green then slid aside with a hiss. She slipped inside, breath-catching as the doors sealed behind her. The room was chaos. Overturned tables, broken glass, and stasis pods smashed open, their occupants freed or dead. Alarms blared in her ears, red lights spinning like blood in. Water. She ducked behind a bench, heart pounding. Something had gone wrong. Someone had tried to break in, or the station had locked down again. She dared not think of what might have happened to him. She had to find him before it was too late. She crept between scattered equipment, eyes scanning every pod. One was empty, another shattered. Her pulse throbbed as she saw the pod marked with his name, the seal broken, the air venting its hiss. She closed the distance on trembling legs, calling his name softly, her voice a whisper against the roar of alerts. No answer came. Panic clawed at her chest, making her breath shallow. She knelt beside the pod, her fingers exploring the empty space, searching for any sign he had been moved. Then she saw footprints in the thin layer of dust, a series of small bare prints leading toward the back door. Relief and dread warred inside her. He had been moved again somewhere else in this vast station. She rose quickly, wiping her palms on her uniform, and followed the trail. The corridor beyond the lab was darker, lights cut off by the lockdown. She flicked her wrist console, casting a pale glow ahead. The walls were lined with vents in service, ducts, her only escape routes, but the floor was slick with spilled coolant. She stepped carefully, each footfall leaving a faint smear evidence she could not erase. She shook off the thought there was no turning back, At the corridor's end, she found a heavy door sealed with a thick lock. Her key would not open it. She knelt and pressed her palm to the metal, calling on the power that had broken her bonds. The lock's energy field shimmered under her touch, then cracked like glass. Sparks flew, and the door slid open. Cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of the station's outer hull space beyond, vast and uncaring. She stepped through into a low-ceiling chamber, pipes snaking along the ceiling, vents exhaling plumes of steam. In the center, 2 guards stood back to back, each with a hold on him. He was bent double, his arms pinned behind him, his head hanging limp. Her breath caught. He was alive, but barely. One guard pulled back a staff about to strike, and she felt her heart seized. In a blur, she sprinted forward, grabbing the staff, wrenching it free with a roar that echoed off the walls. Her uniform melding with her skin as her power flared. The guard staggered, eyes wide, and she slammed the staff into his chest. The second guard reacted, charging her with a snarl. She ducked, pivoted, and delivered a crushing blow that sent him reeling into the vents. Steam hissed as he collapsed. She dropped the staff and ran to him, kneeling beside his broken form. His breath was shallow, blood streaking his temple. She pressed her palm to his chest, feeling his heartbeat fluttered like a trapped bird. She closed her eyes and reached deep, willing her power to flow into him, warmth, strength, life. A faint pulse under her palm, a spark of recognition in his eyes, and he coughed, spitting blood. She helped him sit up, supporting his weight, and he leaned against her, weary but alive. His lips curved in a weak smile, and she returned it relief, washing through her. Behind them, the station alarm blared louder, and red lights bathed the room in urgency. She looked at him, his face pale but determined. They shared a breath, wordless promise shining between them. They would leave this place together. He leaned on her as she rose, taking his weight, and they crept toward the exit. Every corner could hide an enemy, every shadow a trap. She led him through service ducts when the halls were clear. Okay. Over maintenance catwalks that swayed under their weight, her uniform torn and smeared with grease. But he held fast, trusting her, drawing strength from her resolve. Finally, they reached the outer hull access-on airlock leading to their rescue ship. She input the override code in her wrist console, and the door opened with a hiss of decompression. She felt cold space on her face, stars glittering beyond the glass. She half-dragged him inside, slamming the hatch, sealing it, and gasping as breathable air filled the cabin. He sank to the deck, exhausted, and she knelt beside him, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. His eyes met hers, fierce and grateful, and she felt a warmth she had never known. They had defied every command, every gene, every limitant. He was alive because she had fought. She took his hand, pressing it to her heart, and together they watched the station recede into the void. Free at last, she and he drifted through the chamber's shadows, breathing hard, hearts pounding like war drums as the station's red alarms throbbed around them. Danger pressed close, a living thing. He leaned heavily against her shoulder, the wound at his side seeping through his makeshift bandage, and she felt a wave of helplessness crash over her. She would not let him die now. When freedom was within reach, she planted her feet, squared her shoulders, and met his eyes. Fierce with promise, the corridor beyond the airlock was fractured by sparks and flickering lights. Walls torn open where the lockdown stations had failed, wires dangling like wounded veins. Every ruined panel was a warning, every echo a threat. She guided him past a broken security turret, its barrel twisted and useless, and felt her body hum with the memory of her power, how it bent metal and fractured locks. But she would not unleash it here too. Many innocent lives might still lie behind those walls. They had to slip through the heart of the station without drawing every guard on their trail. She scanned the junction ahead, where 3 corridors met. One led back to the cells, one to the central spire, and the last toward the docking bays. She crouched beside him, whispering words he could barely hear over the alarms. He nodded, trusting her, though his eyes held fear. She led him down the middle corridor, stepping lightly over fractured tiles, every breath shallow. Station shudder, a deep tremor that rattled her bones, structural integrity slipping. Time was running out. Around the corner, she froze to guards, heavy armor blackened by energy burns, their visors glowing ice-white, blocking their path. Each held an energy rifle trained on the opposite wall, unaware of her presence. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She could not fight too, not in his condition. She pressed him behind a collapsed crate, the sharp smell of scorched circuits stinging her nose. Her mind raced if she could distract them, draw them away. He could slip past. She drew a small canister from her belt smoke grenades she had, prized from the lab. She struck its cap against the crate's edge, and it hissed to life. She lobbed it past the guard's feet, and a plume of thick white smoke billowed out, filling the corridor like a suffocating fog. The guards cursed, stepping back, rifles swinging blindly. She grabbed his arm, pulling him forward, and they sprinted down the side passage, the smoke masking their escape. Their path twisted through maintenance hall's pipes, groaning overhead. Red steam hissing through broken seals. He stumbled, pain rippling through him, and she caught his waist, steadying him. She knelt and pressed her palm to the wound, channeling a fraction of her power, enough to dull the pain. Seal-torn vessels, but not enough to heal him fully. He exhaled, eyes closed, and she felt his grip tighten around her arm. They reached a bulkhead door marked Genetics Control. This was where the station's biolabs centralized their research. She pressed her wrist console to the reader, and it glowed again, recognizing her stolen credentials. The door parted with a groan, revealing a wide chamber of glowing tanks, each holding strange specimens, plants that thrived in acid, creatures that bred in darkness. The lights here were calm, a deceptive serenity under which horrors grew. She guided him between the rows, knowing guards could rush in any moment. The central console stood at the room's heart, a sphere of translucent crystal, its surface etched with alien runes. It controlled the entire genetic network, including the failsafes that kept prisoners in their cells. She needed to shut down the lockdown across the station, restore power to the corridors, to open every door to give them a clear path to the docking bay. He leaned against a tank, breathing ragged, and she knelt at the console, pressing her palms. To its cool surface, the runes glowed at her touch, responding. She called on her power, letting energy flow from her into the crystal, its facets humming as it accepted her charge. The lights in the chamber flickered, then steadied, and the growl of locked doors averted. Each failsafe releasing, corridors opening like veins unclenching. A deep vibration moved through the station. Freedom was sweeping the decks. But freedom brought chaos. Alarms shifted from red to urgent. Yellow guards would respond. Station defenses rebooting, doors swinging open to let Allied forces loose. She jumped as the chamber doors burst inward, 5 guards with rifles raised, their visors pure white in the brightening hall. The lead guard barked a command she could not translate, and they advanced, boots clanging on the metal floor. She rose, hands trembling, but he stepped forward, surprising her. His eyes burned with purpose, even through pain. He gripped one guard's arm, twisting, and the rifle clattered to the floor. The man staggered, and she moved with him, sweeping the rifle aside and kicking it toward the others. They hesitated, confusion flickering across their helmets' orders, lost in the reboot. She lunged, grabbing a long broken pipe from the floor, and faced them as one. Bullets tore through the tanks behind them, acid dripping from ruptured containers, smoke curling up like specters. She swung the pipe, deflecting a stun blast, and he lifted his hand, touching her shoulder, guiding her. Together they pushed forward, a strange war dance of 2 wounded hearts fighting side by side. Each strike they landed was a promise to each other, to the galaxy, that no chain could hold them indefinitely. When the last guard fell, they stood amidst wreckage tanks, cracked biofluids pooling at their feet, warning lights blinking. She exhaled, strength ebbing, and he reached for her hand. They limped from the chamber, corridor doors clicking open ahead, their path clear at last. Beyond awaited the docking bay, the ship that had brought her here, the ship that now would carry them home. Every step was agony, but she smiled through tears. She had defied the station's core, shattered its genetic controls, and saved him again. And as the docking bay doors yawed open, she lifted him into her arms, her power flickering like dying embers, and carried him toward freedom, toward a sky he had once saved her under, toward a future they would build together, defying every command, every gene, every limit. Asterisk, she stepped. Out onto the barren plain, the world beyond the station, a wasteland of crimson sand and jagged black rock swines, howled across the dunes, carrying grit that stung her skin and clawed at her throat. He leaned heavily on her shoulder, every breath a struggle against the thin, toxic air. She draped her coat over his head like a shield, breathing through the cloth to filter out the worst of the dust. Each step sank ankle-deep, and she dragged him forward, her boots clanging against hidden stones. Her muscles burned, her lungs screamed. But she refused to falter. His life depended on her strength. Above them, the sun hung low, a swollen ember in a blood-stained sky, its heat barely reaching them through the shifting haze. The rescue ship waited beyond the dunes, its hull a pale speck on the horizon, its promise and salvation flickering in the distance. Between them and safety lay miles of hostile land and rumors of predators that hunted in the storm screechers, whose jaws could crush bone, whose claws could tear through steel. She pressed him closer, her arm around his waist, and used her other hand to steady his injured leg. Every thump of his foot against the sand reminded her of the stake they had. Risked every falter could mean death. A distant roar rose with the wind, and she froze, head darting side to side as the sound grew. Something large moved beneath the curving dune ahead, a shifting mass that throbbed beneath the surface. She tightened her grip on him, gaze narrowing, and the sand erupted as a creature burst free, its spiny legs splayed like a horrific star, a rounded carapace armored in chitin and jaws dripping acid. It hissed, eyes gleaming white, and thundered toward them, each step sending tremors through the ground. He stifled a gasp, but she steadied him, voice firm, though her heart pounded. She whispered one word, "Run," and pulled him away, stumbling across the sand. The beast closed in fast, its mandibles clicking, steam rising from its back like smoke. She reached behind her belt and drew a slender Rada shock baton she had taken from the lab. She activated it, and its tip flared blue, crackling with power. She shouted, startling him awake, then turned to face the creature. He froze, fear pinning him in place, and she grabbed his hand, squeezing until his eyes cleared. She pointed to her baton, and he nodded, trusting her. Together, they sprinted, back toward a ridge of rocks, each footfall kicking up plumes of red dust. The creature lunged, claws gouging the air where they had stood moments before. She swung the baton, and an electric arc sizzled into the beast's leg, scorching chitin and sending it screeching in pain. It whirled, acid spittle hissing from its jaws, and she braced herself for another strike. He jerked free, stumbling past her to grab his own weapon, a small kinetic pistol she had jury-rigged with spare parts. She fired at the beast's underbelly, and the shot struck true, tearing a chunk of armor away. The creature howled, a sound that rattled her bones, then lunged again. She kicked him back behind her, raising the baton high and driving it into the creature's carapace. Power surged, the beast's body convulsed, and it collapsed in a heap of broken limbs and hissed steam. Her chest heaved as she turned to him, worry flooding her. He knelt, cradling his injured leg, which now pulsed with fresh pain. She knelt beside him, pressing her palm to the wound, channeling a calm pulse of her power, enough to staunch the worst bleeding, enough to dull agony so he could walk. He exhaled, eyes closing, and she propped him to his feet, wrapping an arm around him for support. She scanned the sky. Clouds of red dust began to roll in, storms gathering like dark armies at the horizon. She would not linger. She pulled him forward, every step a testament of will. The dune field stretched before them, a sea of rolling sand with hidden perils beneath. She led him toward a jagged ridge she had spotted earlier, rock formations that would block the worst of the wind, give them a path beneath the storm's teeth. Each grain of sand was a challenge, every gust a wall to push through. His strength waned, but she held him close, whispering words of encouragement, reminding him of home, of sky and rivers and laughter. His eyes fluttered open, hope shining there even through pain. As they neared the ridge, a second roar echoed. A smaller shape darted from behind a rock, sliding across the sand like a living dagger. She caught the flash of its eyes, cold and deadly. Then it struck, pouncing on him with claws outstretched. She dove between them, baton swinging, deflecting claws that could cut through flesh. He fell, and she shielded him with her body, trading his pain for her own. Acid dripped from the creature's maw, sizzling into her coat. She screamed, anger and fear mingling, and stomped its leg, jarring it free. She pried its jaws apart, baton humming in her hand, delivered a final surge of power that blackened its carapace. Stillness followed, and the beast lay broken. She rushed to him, pressing water from her canteen to his lips, helping him drink. He coughed, then drank. Again, his strength gathering like a flame. The sky darkened, lightning flickering and swirling dust clouds, an electrical storm born of charged sand and static air. She scanned for shelter. Ahead rose a narrow crevasse between two boulders, dark and inviting. She helped him limp forward, guiding him into the cleft just as thunder ripped the sky. Lightning flashed, illuminating the sands in a blinding glare, and the wind hammered at them, carrying shards of red grit that would shred skin in seconds. In the narrow gap they crouched, backs braced against rough stone, and she wrapped her coat around them both, closing her eyes as the storm's fury battered the world. He shivered. She pressed her body against his, sharing warmth. She whispered promises she would not let the elements claim them. She would carry him to the ship herself if she must. He nodded, grateful breath against her neck, and she felt his pulse slow, his strength returning. Beyond the rocks the storm would pass, and beyond that lay the final climb toward the rescue ship's ramp. She pressed a kiss to his temple, then peered out through a slit, and the stone winds eased, dust settled, and the sun's dull glow returned. She lifted him, hoisting him over her shoulder, and stepped out into the calm. The dunes glistened red and gold in the fading light, and the ship's silhouette lay close now, its engines humming salvation into the sky. With the last of her strength, she strode across the sands, each step lighter than before, carrying him toward home across the alien wastes, through storms and beasts, defying every limit for love, for life, for freedom. Asterisk, they reached the edge of a hidden valley at first. Light, the sky pale and still dawn promised hope, but betrayal lurked in shadows. She led him through the mist, her eyes scanning every rise of ground, every draped vine. His strength had returned enough to stand without support, but his wounds still throbbed. She moved between him and the open land, a silent shield against unseen threats. Mist curled around their ankles, every footstep muffled into silence. Behind a cluster of ferns, they found refuge in overgrown terrace crumbling under creeping roots, a place she had spotted on her first scout. She guided him to a mossy slab of stone and knelt to press her palm to his side, closing torn tissue with a gentle glow. He leaned back, eyes fluttering as pain eased. She brushed damp hair from his forehead, softening her fierce resolve with tenderness. He smiled weakly, gratitude shining in his gaze. They would rest here until the sun climbed high enough to light their path to the rendezvous point, the old watchtower where the pilot waited. Freedom lay a few hours' march away. She gathered her courage, laid out a light ration, and helped him eat. As he chewed, she stood guard, senses heightened, waiting for a sign. Any sign that the path was clear. A sudden crack of twig beneath heavy boots, she spun, heart clattering, and drew a breath of shock. Two figures stepped into the light. One, her guard from the corridor, the one who risked the key. Beside him stood another woman in dark fatigues, helmet off, hair braided in tight knots. The guard's eyes flicked to her, guilt and fear mingled there. The woman's lips curved in a cold smile. Before she could shout a warning, the guard raised his hand, and she lowered her baton. "I'm sorry," he whispered, voice trembling. "They came for me," threatened her daughter. I had no choice. The woman's eyes glittered as she unholstered a pistol, pointing it at him. He froze, water leaking from his eyes. She pressed the gun to his temple in a soft motion, and he slumped as a single shot rang out. Blood blossomed on his uniform. Anger and horror coiled inside her, but she held her ground, muscles tense. The sharpshooter stepped forward, boots crunching on the moss, and aimed at the man beside her. He was unarmed, but her eyes burned with promise. No one harmed him yet. She raised her free hand, voice low but fierce. "Let him live," she said, "or you'll answer to me." The woman's smile widened. She knew her prisoner was weak, and her adversary was alone. He coughed, clutching his side. And she moved to kneel beside him, pressing her hand to his rib. She hid her fear, channeling power to dull his pain. He met her eyes, confusion and relief warring there, but her gaze stayed locked on the shooter. "What do you want?" she demanded. The woman's smile flickered, then sharpened. "The station looms on this world," she said, voice smooth as silk. "We need its data cores for survival. You freed him, but you'll free me as well, or he dies." She tapped her pistol against his chest, opened the pass ahead, disarmed the defenses, and walk away. Laha's silence stretched, dawn light creeping. Over the ferns, she weighed his life against thousands more that might die if the station fell into the wrong hands. Her jaw clenched. He coughed again, eyes narrowing despite pain. "No," she said, quiet as thunder. The woman's face hardened. She flicked her wrist, and from the guard's pouch she retrieved a small device, a detonator. "You have seconds?" She hissed. She pressed her lips to his temple, then rose. Calm overcame rage. She turned to the woman. "You forget who I am," she said. Energy pulsed beneath her skin, a hum like distant drums. The shooter's finger twitched on the trigger. She raised her hand and whispered an invocation he could not hear. The air rippled, leaves trembled. The ground beneath the shooter's boots cracked, roots snaking up to wrap her ankles. She screamed, pistol clattering to the earth, and the cables of living would tighten. The shooter's eyes widened, panic stealing her courage. She spat a curse and fired wildly. Bullets thudded into tree trunks and stone, shrapnel spitting wood pulp. But the vines held fast, drawing her upright until she floated inches above the ground. She kicked, arms flailing, but the roots held. The detonator clattered from her hand. She shrieked as vines rose to her hands, wrapping wrists so tight her bones groaned. Then the roots retreated, leaving her bound and gasping. Silence settled, broken only by his shallow breathing and the station far off in the distance. She strode forward, yanked the shooter's pistol free, and placed its barrel under her enemy's chin. "Let him live," she repeated, voice unyielding. Fear flickered in the shooter's eyes, and she nodded, tears mixing with grime. The pistol dropped, echoing. She pocketed it and released the vines. The shooter fell to her knees, shaking. She turned to him, stepping over the shooter's body to reach the man bleeding at her feet. She knelt, healing energy in her palm, knitting flesh, and stim until the wound sealed and warmth returned. He gasped, eyes blinking, then smiled with a mix of relief and awe. She helped him stand, brushing blood from his uniform. The shooter lay slumped behind them, bound by vines that would wither soon, but she left her mark. He slung an arm around her waist, supporting her every step as they turned toward the sunlit pass. Betrayal had threatened at dawn, but she had defied every command and saved him once more. Together they strode forward, leaving broken treachery in their wake. Closer now to the rescue ship and the promise of freedom beyond every limit. Asterisk. They emerged onto the landing pad as the sun dipped, low crimson light glinting off the ship's hull, engines humming in welcome. She half carried him, half led him, every step heavy with relief and pain, but hope burned bright in her chest. Behind them the station's alarms roared, but here they found only open space and a clear path. To their rescue, he blinked, breath catching as he saw the open ramp, felt the promise of safety in the air's hum. She smiled through sweat and grime, her uniform torn but her spirit unbroken. They reached the base of the ramp, and she pressed a hidden switch on her wrist console. The doors slid open. warm light pouring out to meet them. Inside the ship's cabin, the pilot waited, eyes wide as she helped them in. He guided them to a bench, hands gentle as he settled her mate. The ship shuddered with power, ready to rise. She stood at the ramp's edge, heart hammering outside. The station's watchdogs gathered, weapons raised, waiting to reclaim their prize. She would not let them. She drew a deep breath, muscles coiling. He caught her hand, eyes fierce with gratitude and love. She leaned close, voice low as a vow. I will not let them touch you again. Electricity crackled around her fingertips, the spark of power she had honed through every trial. She stepped to the ramp's lip, wind rushing past as she faced the station's forces. A dozen guards stood at the edge of the pad, rifles aimed, red visors glowing. Their leader barked a command, and they advanced, boots pounding metal. She raised a hand, energy flaring, and sent a pulse across the pad. Wave that knocked guards off their feet, sent rifles skittering out of their hands. The others hesitated, fear flickering behind their visors. She did not wait. She surged forward in a blur body moving faster than fear, strength born of every fight she had faced. Bullets hissed past, but she bent them with her power, turning them aside like wind. She reached the guards one by one and shattered their armor with a touch, cells unbound, locks undone until they fell silent at her feet. He watched, awe and love mixing in his gaze as she carved a path through there, lines defying every limit. When the last guard dropped, she turned and raced back to him, energy spent but will unbent. He rose, leaning on her, and together they stepped fully into the cabin just as the ramp sealed shut. The ship's engines roared to life thrusters, glowing white-hot, pulling them free of the pad. Through the viewport, she saw the station shrink. Beneath them, a fortress that had tried to break her, tried to own her, but now lay beaten by her resolve. A surge of triumph pulsed through her veins, and she wrapped her arms around him, laughter and tears mingling as the ship lifted toward the sky. He kissed her forehead, voice rough with emotion. You saved me, she smiled, breathing out words that tasted like victory. We saved each other. The cabin rumbled, acceleration pressing them back into their seats. And she closed her eyes, letting relief wash through her. When the stars glimmered beyond the viewport, they knew they were free. She guided him to the comlink, calling their allies worlds that had watched, worlds that would stand with them now. Plans for new beginnings formed between their whispered words of home, of life beyond these battles. Hours later, the ship glided into the hangar of a friendly cruiser, greeted by medics and friends. She held him as they helped him down, each step towards safety, a step away from captivity's shadow. He leaned into her, strength returning with each breath, and she pressed a gentle kiss to his cheek. In the days that followed, they walked hand in hand beneath twin suns, laughter replacing fear. She found a quiet hill overlooking the ocean, where they stood together, wind in their hair, free at last. He took her hand, pressing it to his heart. No matter what comes, we face it as one. She nodded, eyes bright with love and promise. Every command broken, every limit surpassed, every gene defied together, tattooed. And as they looked out to the wide horizon, they knew their story would echo across the stars, of a bond stronger than any chain of defiance that could shatter worlds, of love that bound to souls more surely than any prison ever could.